Hi, I'm Kristen. Disrupting traditional management consulting through the power of AI technology is not just a movement, it's the heart of our mission. Here at Culturefy, we're empowering leaders and employees to take action. But more importantly, we're dedicated to creating work-life cultures that are world-changing. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today to be part of this roundtable discussion as we explore what's trending in HR. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our What's Trending in HR New Year, New Strategies Roundtable series. And today we're really excited to continue our series, unpacking another trending HR topic as we head into 2024, cultivating trust and talent loyalty. And at a time when the integrity of human resources is just critical in organizations, this topic of building trust, or in some cases, perhaps rebuilding trust, is more critical than ever in attracting and retaining quality talent in your organizations. So if you're new to our series, every week we hear from a panelist of experts, subject matter experts, and thought leaders in the space. And today I get to welcome one of our very own, Amanda Johnson, our Chief People Officer here at Culturefy. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you. But first, would you care to say a few words just to introduce yourself for those tuning in?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Kristen. Yeah, this is just an amazing opportunity that we're having these conversations. As Kristen mentioned, I'm Amanda Johnson. I am the Chief People Officer. But mostly I'm just passionate about helping organizations improve, their culture and just being a part of Culturefy, where we are constantly, working with organizations. We care about work, life, and culture. And so, the organizations that we have the opportunity to work with, this is, our main focus is how can we come in and be able to just, assist and be a partner as organizations are building or improving their culture. Culturefy was birthed, from our founder with over 20 years of experience in management consulting, working with employer brands and transforming, organizational cultures in a very traditional consulting approach. And so now here at Culturefy, we just love having the opportunity to be able to leverage technology through the power of AI, because it's our goal again to now empower the employees of different organizations. And as a chief people officer, just caring about people, it's our goal to make sure everyone has that, sense of belonging. And today's topic, what's trending in HR, cultivating trust, not only is it important for organizations to be able to, have that culture of trust, it's very important in the HR role, that we take on our employees with that fiduciary responsibility and making sure, that they really can trust us as they're coming to us for their needs, because, we tap into their lives every single day in some capacity, whether we know it or not, whether inside the office or outside the office. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and, just kind of diving in, having this conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. We don't always get to have these conversations with people in the HR space, and so I think this is going to be great to dive into this topic. And as you mentioned, we're talking about cultivating a culture of trust with HR and the role that plays in attracting and retaining talent. So we're going to talk about a ton of things. I'm really excited to dive in. Like what's the real cost in dollars of distrust in our organization? The number might surprise you. And if we're in a rebuilding season where we're trying to rebuild that trust, where do we start? What are organizations doing? What are you seeing that's working? I'm ready to dive into some of those topics as well. So as a reminder to those who are tuning in live, please utilize the chat feature to connect with each other. We really want to build a community here at Culturefy. We believe that HR leaders have this amazing opportunity to transform organizational cultures. And so we want to provide roundtables to share knowledge, share learning, but also provide a community. So we have a ton more coming in that space in 2024, but please utilize the chat function to connect. Also, I want to highlight the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please drop in questions as we have our conversation, and I'll do my best to get to as many as we can. I have a ton of questions, but I want to make sure I'm asking your questions as well to Amanda. So please join in that conversation. Now, to kick off our conversation, I want to read recent quote from a Workday 2024 Trends report about how trust is intricately linked with both employee engagement and loyalty. So the context here of this quote was about change management and how organizations are changing, handling organizational change. So employees who report high levels of trust and care from leadership are more than twice as likely to agree that their company has successfully navigated external pressures and 40% less likely to leave. So Amanda, let's start there. Clearly, when it comes to talent loyalty, a culture of trust and care is important. Do you agree with this correlation? And if so, how have you really seen this play out in organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with it. And it is a direct correlation. When I think about a culture of trust and, when it was most evident, at least in my career, was going through the Great Recession, for instance. At a time when companies were having to do layoffs, and we're somewhat there now, not in the same capacity, but we do hear of companies, doing layoffs. Well, we know work still has to be done, right? And so what happens when those layoffs happen, when the layoffs do happen, the work gets redistributed, amongst the peers and the colleagues. And so the organizations who have that culture of trust, the employees that are still there who are sticking it out, it's apparent that there's a direct correlation. When you're still able to keep operations going, you're still able to motivate your team who may, have the ambiguity and the questions on what may happen to them. Right. And so when you have that direct correlation, or it is a direct correlation, when you have leaders and employees trusting each other, leaders are communicating what is about to happen. And I know you mentioned change management, before change management is its own segment for a specific reason. Like a lot of organizations don't have formal change management programs in place. Well, the reason, why it's important is because when change happens, significant change happens, it's a process on how do we take the next steps to be able to ensure our culture is protected, to still be able to ensure operations are continuing on. But then when we're looking at, retaining the talent, we really then have to, as changes happen, how do we also protect, our talent who have given us, years of their lives in some cases. And so implementing, such things as those change management practices to make sure communications are properly, um, happening as the change is taking place, you know, all of that's occurring just to maintain that culture of trust. And so, yeah, it's a total direct correlation. And again, throughout the recession, the Great Recession, we've seen those organizations who were able to come out of it, stronger than they were before, the change started happening and economic influences started happening.
Yeah, sometimes I think we hear about ones that did not work and didn't handle change well more than we hear about the organizations that handled it well. And that's sometimes because of the bad news spreads fast. But there are organizations that are doing this well, and it is that's a powerful affirmation for organizations who are taking the time to communicate well, to bring in their leaders and their people into the conversation when appropriate, as you mentioned. So yeah, I think that's definitely important to recognize. So before we dive too much into everything that you talked about, because I know we can dive into, there's so much more with everything that you just said. I want to kind of look at the state of trust in organizations today. So you mentioned that there is a huge correlation. It's clearly important. Well, we were doing some research again on the trending topics. And a McLean and Company 2024 Trends report had a lot to say on the matter. That, as the slide says, the high cost with low trust in HR. And that in today's organizations, really, trust isn't just something that is nice to have, but it's really a must-have for HR effectiveness. And really quickly, just want to throw out some of these stats that we found. That only 41% of non-HR respondents report high trust in HR. That's not a significant number. And then this one, this number was probably the most sobering for me when I read it. That voluntary turnover costs, some of which is obviously connected to distrust in an organization, cost $630 billion in the US alone. Now, this stat is from 2020. So to me, that means that this number is likely higher as we are in 2024 today. Um, so why, Amanda, is there such a lack of trust in HR? Why are these numbers so compelling?
Yeah, I mentioned before about HR's role, and really being responsible, taking a fiduciary role in our talent. And so when we look at the lack of trust in HR, some of the reasons comes because of the information that is housed in HR, right? We touch everyone's lives, whether it's through their payroll, whether it's through their benefit package, every major life event HR typically is going to be aware of it. And so now, what do we do with that information? How are we protecting that information? So, one of the major reasons there's a lack of trust in HR is because it's, the concern about a lack of confidentiality. One of the SHRM reports that came out, about 52% of employees are concerned about HR's ability to maintain confidential information. And that's huge. That's 50-50. Every person that's coming, every two people that's coming in, one of them do not trust the fact that, HR is going to keep confidentiality in that conversation. There's perceived bias, right? As much as we like to try to keep bias out of the conversation, we just know it's naturally there in situations. Ineffective conflict resolution, as employees are looking for some type of help if they're having a situation with their manager or with, you know, just their colleagues. And if it gets escalated to HR, are we doing a good job at helping, with conflict resolution? The lack of transparency. One of the surveys by Elderman that came out was 60% of, employees believe that HR should provide more information about the decision-making processes. How was my raise determined? Or how was, the lack of a promotion or lack of a raise determined? And a lot of times, it's perceived that HR has the ability to push those jobs and, those conversations back to the managers. And so the employees now have to go back and have a difficult conversation that has already taken place, but they're looking for more clarity. Of course, you bring in organizational politics, insufficient communication. Communicating inside organizations is pivotal, and again, not to plug too much about Culturefy in this conversation, but the beauty about, applications that can help bridge communications between departments, whether it's your marketing team, and your communication department with your HR team, you know, it's imperative that communications, are flowing and the messaging is being, sent out correctly. Unclear roles and responsibilities in HR. Sometimes people think HR just they are making their own decisions, and then now communications will get pushed out without the involvement and the collaboration of key stakeholders, right? And so whenever decisions get made without key stakeholders' input, you start seeing a breakdown, right? You start seeing that lack of trust. Do they really care about me? Am I just a tool in this organization? And then, of course, everyone, may have had negative past experiences. And so some of that lack of trust is built on, have I went and taken my case to HR and got shut down? And so if I get shut down and now my negative, experience, like I mentioned before, we focus on employer brands. Well, I may take my case now to my peer. And if I'm taking my case to my peer who has never interacted with HR before, they're forming their own opinions about an organization that they may have never, experienced directly, but just because there has been a negative experience from a key stakeholder, from an employee, now it's like building up this whole lack of trust. And so we just have to look at, why are we breaking down the trust, especially why is HR being perceived as like there's this huge lack of trust? in organizations, there's some validity, behind these reasons that employees have experienced. But ultimately, according to your numbers, it's a huge impact on business. And so this is why it's important we're having this conversation because, $680 billion is a lot of money. And I know all of the CEOs, if they see the dollar impact of the lack of trust, they'll want to make the investments to see how we can improve that. And there's a lot of opportunities right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Communications is my role here at Culturefy. So that clarity and communication, just being transparent is huge. And it's a great opportunity to really help move the needle forward. And we did have a great question in chat. So just a plug for those watching live, please take advantage of our chat and our Q&A opportunity to drop in your questions. And Amanda, you kind of mentioned this already, but the question is really around, there's a lot of belief, especially at the employee, the team level, that HR is really just there for the company and not the employees. And that kind of contributes to some of the stress and maybe the distrust that you're mentioning. How can we overcome as leaders in HR? How can we overcome this misconception?
I think a lot is involving HR, right, in strategy planning sessions. HR, again, has been perceived as a very transactional department. And so basically, employees, have to be recruited. So there's a transaction. Let's get a job description posted. Let's get, the resumes come in. Let's go through the interview process. That HR is the one kind of coordinating those items, and then the actual hiring manager is, making the final decisions. However, HR has been perceived as, just a transactional department. How do I get paid? How do I get my benefits? But as we tie HR into a lot of strategy conversations, so they really understand their role in the organization as a whole, you know, um, and how it impacts operations. Because, for instance, if, when one of, the people or clients that we've had the opportunity, to work with as we're going in, looking at, their performance and how HR's involvement with the day-to-day operations, kind of plays out, we had conversations where there were recruiters who really didn't understand, the organization's goal. For instance, this was in a financial institution. The organization's goal was to increase their loan portfolio. So in order to increase the loan portfolio, we need to hire more loan officers in order to go do business development, so we can get those loans on the commercial buildings, on residential properties, And so the recruiter did not necessarily take the importance on, wait a minute, my organization cannot make money if they do not have the number of lenders in place to go do business development. And so if those people never, if the job postings never get posted, if the recruiters aren't taking their role as seriously as they possibly can, that impacts the overall dollar, the bottom line. And so, as we look at bridging the gap, we have to have more communications and more collaboration and understanding with, HR understanding its role and impact of the organization, as a whole. And so, if you have, for instance, certain departments that feel they're not being heard when, that their needs aren't being fulfilled fast enough, HR typically does have a kind of negative tone in which we don't have things as efficient as other operations. And so it's really important that we understand our role in the operations and the efficiency, that way we're able to really make sure as we're recruiting talent, our pipeline is staying built as it should, and then mostly we're retaining the talent, because you're going to burn out other individuals. And if they're trying to do their job, but they do not feel supported, they may potentially leave. And so HR does have such a critical role, but we also have that huge opportunity just by making subtle, changes, right, to improve operations and efficiencies. And I think that then helps build that trust, amongst the other departments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is the danger of silos, and that happens so easily in organizations that are huge and also organizations that are small. It's amazing how we can easily just be in our day to day and not be communicating with each other. And so, utilizing platforms and technology that exists to bring people together, not just at the strategy level, because I think that's a really insightful statement that you were saying about how it's so important for HR leaders to know the organizational goals and be able to connect that to what they're doing day to day so that they can be proactive, right? To be able to say, oh, we're losing people. Why is our turnover happening? Going into the data to really saying, okay, who is leaving? Let's find out why. Because sometimes I think we look at stats and data and we might say, oh, our turnover is not that bad. But if you go a little bit more granular, you can see, well, you're losing all of your female leaders at this level, and that's a problem. So I think what you're saying is really being able to understand the goals and how that translates to your specific role. And also, I mean, that trickles down to the individual team level, right? If I'm able to clearly see how my role is connecting to the organizational goals and moving the needle, I feel that sense of purpose and belonging that you were speaking about. And I'm more inclined to stay because I feel like I'm contributing, I'm using my skills in a way that is moving the needle and also feeling fulfillment. Um, I want to mention, I want to ask you something too, because I think this goes into, just um, that trust building. What about representation? Does that have an element of helping to build trust if there is representation, if your team actually looks like your organization, or is there a challenge there as that could be something causing distrust in an organization?
Well, absolutely. Today's February the 1st, right? And so we are kicking off Black History Month. And as we look at, African Americans in particular, especially in HR leadership, there's only 7% representation there. And the data shows that 58% of African Americans do not trust they have trust issues in the organizations they work for. So those are huge numbers when we're looking at, retaining and recruiting top talent. Certain organizations, they may reach out and have very strong initiatives, going to HBCUs, trying to, improve and recruit, a diverse workforce. However, when those individuals get inside the organization, how do they feel? What is the culture? Who is the person that they can run and, talk to and start building that level of trust? And when you only have 7% represented, African Americans represented in HR, you can kind of imagine why the number is so skewed in the trust levels. Because, again, some of the unconscious bias that comes about, it's not natural for a lot of people, to discriminate against individuals. That's why it's called unconscious, right? It's unconscious for a reason. And we have to be able to, have those conversations and just being aware. They're, based on geographic locations, there may be some, legit constraints on improving, the diversity in organizations. However, we all can become aware and have empathy, right? And so I think, leaning into being more empathetic leaders and understanding we want what's best for our organization as a whole. Organizations, we have our mission, vision, and values. And so are we living up to those? And in the role of HR, we have the opportunity in particular to live it out the best, right? Because we're used to, compliance, we're used to policies and implementing policies and making sure things are followed. But the areas of, mission, vision, and values of organizations, that's the grand opportunity that we have now to include everyone, to have the conversations. And that way, when diverse talent is coming into our organizations, we're building them up. we're not losing them, especially if they're coming from great backgrounds. Being able to have, support systems like mentorships, even looking at how can we now, partner people of, like-mindedness and, work goals that they want to, pursue within their work career. It's important that we kind of foster and be able to provide the tools to our different business units. But if we're displaying, and living everything out ourselves, from our mission, vision, and values, I think we then can help um, kind of distribute this around the entire organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to something that we talk a lot about at Culturefy, work-life culture, and just having that be authentic to your brand, right? Because every organization has a unique brand, mission, vision, value. But the tension I think you're saying is if it says something on paper that is great, but when somebody comes into the team, it's not lived out in that same way. And so really aligning your brand culture strategy and really bringing your entire organization together so that you can help cultivate a culture that is authentic to you so that as people come into the organization there's not a disconnect of well this is what it was saying, this is what you were telling me, and now this is not what my experience is. And we're all improving and wanting to change. Nobody has a perfect culture, but it's about how can we move it forward and do a little bit better and hear those voices. So I think that's something that's really, really powerful. And then, I love what you mentioned about mentorship. That's something that I'm passionate about. And there's so much technology. Again, at Culturefy, we love talking about the latest technology. And so there's so much technology that can help make that easier. Because I've been in huge organizations, I've been in small organizations, and it can be hard to know who outside of your immediate team is there, right? Or maybe it's a little bit intimidating to reach up to somebody who's a director level or a few steps ahead of you. But being able to utilize technology to kind of say, to recommend people who are open to mentorship within your organization that align with your professional goals can really help enhance your mentorship program and really take some of the pressure off of having to manually run it because it can be kind of overwhelming when you're trying to recruit mentors and make sure people are connecting and trying to manually connect people. So being able to utilize technology to really help make that process seamless, I think can go a long way in helping to move the needle with that type of culture development that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree.
Well, and I want to jump into the connection between high trust and high performance. So, we've talked a little bit about this, but I just want to throw up a few stats. And again, I'm not going to go through all of this. There's a lot there. So, if you're watching, please, take a quick glance through that. But the summary, the cliff notes is that when it comes to high trust, organizations with high trust are really better in high performing in recruitment, in shaping strong organizational culture, and in developing leaders. So all of those things are kind of intricately tied to high trust. And so I want to throw that back to you, Amanda. What do you think about this? How do you see this play out in organizations? I mean, these numbers are pretty compelling when we talk about the connection between high trust and high performance.
Exactly, they are. They are. And, we've all heard of great places to work, right? And so every year they conduct an annual study. And so in the annual study, they're consistently finding, that the organizations who have high trust on, that make the list are outperforming, the market. And a lot of times, for example, in 2021, their analysis, the companies who make the list, their total return was, like you showed, 3 times higher, than their peers. And so even from, the Glassdoor Institute, they reported high employee satisfaction, right? They're doing 122%, outperforming their peers over a 10-year period. And so what do we, see when we have high trust and its correlation, to performance? We now have increased employee engagement because, again, thinking about mentorships, right? They're feeling I am supported here. I have someone who, I trust here. I don't have to worry about going to HR. I don't even have to worry about dealing with my manager. I have someone, even more intimate who is able to offer me, this opportunity to mentor me. And it's also feeling, giving back, right? When a mentor is able to give to a mentee, that is also self-satisfying. And so when we have, increased employee engagement, we have improved retention. And so the cost, going back to your slide, about the cost of, employee turnovers and the cost of the lack of trust in organization, these are huge numbers, right? That we can have a direct correlation back to, it all comes down to trust. How are our employees performing? How are they engaged? Are we able to retain good talent? Enhance innovation and creativity, because a lot of times, organizations win when you have people who are able to be creative and think outside the box, come up with ideas, different ways to collaborate. That's where innovation really starts, having an opportunity to take shape. You have faster decision making. And so we know, whenever it takes a long time for decisions to be made, that's burnout. People do not like to constantly think about the same thing, for an extended period of time. And so if we're able to make decisions quicker and now, we keep business moving forward, we look at stronger, client relationships. Our relationships, of course, in HR in particular, our clients are our employees. But then now for organizations, when you have more engaged employees, they are able to now put that energy out on the client, right? And so it's the goal to perform, to be able to have fulfillment, in that performance. And so we also, we can look at other things for us attracting, top talent, reducing, the cost of micromanagement. So as we take, account for as we take account for building the trust inside organizations, and how it correlates, high performance, high trust, these are just areas that we all win. The bottom line, the bottom number, we all win on our bottom lines. And so when we think about, extending this conversation as well with, Gen Zers and, maybe some younger millennials as well, they are willing to sacrifice, certain what can be perceived as economic benefits to be a part of organizations that have a great culture, to be a part of organizations that, they trust their leaders. And so, thinking about the pipeline of tomorrow, it's going to be important that we, implement practices, to cultivate that culture of trust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so true. It's really about showing your people that you're investing in them, that they're more than just a number or they're more than just a job description, right? And you're wanting to help them grow and challenge them in good ways. And when there is that sense of my company believes in me and cares about me and wants me to succeed, people recognize that. And that's a culture that people want to be a part of. Now, we've thrown a lot of numbers, and those last numbers about performance were pretty impressive. So if somebody is watching and kind of nodding along and saying, yes, in 2024, we want to see similar numbers in XYZ area. But, we've got a long way to go, and we're okay admitting that. How can they get started? And we've had a couple of comments in chat as well, kind of how do we rebuild? How do we reestablish? How do we get started? What are some options for organizations to kind of start that process of rebuilding or just saying we can always do better in this area?
Yeah, I think, in 2024 in particular, first we can leverage technology, right? We have the opportunity to be able to collaborate with our teams in, such better ways than traditional emails that, for instance, that you may have to, filter through a long chain of emails. What collaboration tools are out there that are available, where one can check, let's check the culture first. Let's check where we are. So if you're in a rebuilding mode, this is an opportunity now, let's put a survey out there. And then how can we do a survey quickly? There's tools out there, again, sorry, a plug for Culturefy, right? But there are tools out there, such as Culturefy, that you can take quick surveys to get the feedback from your people. Listen to them, because that's going to be part of listening, right? To even just to become aware, how are they feeling? And so then you have, learning and development. How do we, if we want to build that area of trust, we have to let our people know that we are here to support them in their career paths, right? We just don't, and then from an HR function, we just don't want to say, hey, we process your payroll. But, you have a real relationship with your manager. We have a real, duty to make sure managers are equipped with tools. How can your manager now help lead you into a path, within your career that you're going to benefit from it, emotionally, financially? And so what type of learning and development tools, do you have out there? What type of, campaign functions are there available to recruit, and take the workload off? If you are in a hiring capacity right now, you really want to be able to find the top talent, because people are getting laid off. And so as people get laid off, do you want to just post, your standard job posting on one of the, job posting boards that every other organization is looking for that same role? Or do you want to have a more tailored, customized approach to target, that individual? And this comes back to thinking creatively, right? HR and marketing typically has not had that unity. And when you look at a marketing effort to target internal employees, there are so many creative ways we can reach that employee, through specific targeting. Let's go and find them where they are. If they are on Facebook, for instance, and they are dog lovers, why not let them know we will support, your loving of dogs. We will support you and meet you where you are. So it's nice to be able to recruit. If your organization going through downsizing right now and layoffs, and you're trying to retain the talent that you do have, it's important that you too know now communications is going to be, more important than ever, because you want them to know what's about to take place. You don't want individuals to have to think, for make up their own story, basically. And so in HR in particular, we want to make sure our organizations know what's going on. And kind of going back to the change management processes, as these changes are taking place, or if you want to be able to reshape, rebrand your culture and rebuild the trust, think about it from a traditional use change management methodologies. The ACAR method, for instance, where you have your awareness, you have your desire, you have the knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so there are organizations you can reach out to and say, hey, help me go through, proper processes to make sure our people, know that we are here to support them, because we want to build trust. And, some people may say, well, hey, if they're doing layoffs, they don't have, the financial money to make an investment in, a different tool or technology, or, being able to solve these items. But then, according to the numbers and the data that we talked about before, it's almost like businesses don't have that option. They cannot afford to not invest in their people. And so it may be an investment that has to take place, because protecting the individuals and organizations is, it's the number one priority in order to get the ultimate results that, organizations are looking for. And so, that's where I would say, start, leveraging technology, and, utilizing methodologies that have been proven that work. Strong communications, community, right? Everyone is talking about community. Certain people, they don't want to be on social platforms. But if you have an opportunity for your own organization to have, its internal platform of community, that's phenomenal. And that's just a great opportunity that you can build, to build community with inside the organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the community piece too, because it just ties it back to that authenticity, right? And again, there's things that we won't be able to communicate completely to our people, but there's so much that we can. And I think doing it in a smart way and a clear way, and a way that shows that trust and care, that we really care about you guys, you're not just a number, really does so much. And that kind of brings me to my next question. So you touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on it, around how do you ensure transparency to promote trust? So if somebody is saying like, I'm trying to do this, I want to do this better, I think you've mentioned the different ways that we can do that, but some people might say, well, in my organization, leaders say one thing, but I don't see any change. What would you say would help ensure that transparency in organizations that are trying to move the needle in that area?
Yeah, if again, mission, vision, values, it does have to start in leadership. It has to be modeled. Our founder, for instance, he will be the first to say leadership is action and not position. And so modeling out those behaviors will help build the trust because it's a culture breakdown when you have leaders who say one thing but aren't, acting on what they're saying. And so the way we sometimes get leaders to act on what they say is back to the bottom line. We may have to remind them if we don't involve our key stakeholders in some of these decision making processes, or if we, break down the culture, if we're breaking down trust inside our organization, we will be impacted. Numbers don't lie. Old saying, what man lies, woman lies, but numbers don't lie, right? And so if we look at, okay, our turnover, if we look at, the cost of having to recruit now, we can put all the money in the world recruiting, but then when we don't retain individuals, that's money gone out the window. And so this should be motivation for leaders to be able to act on what they are saying, and act on what they are preaching. Um, and you'll be amazed, how much can come out of collaboration, how much can come out on, just individuals having a say so and making recommendations. Of course, we can't shape the whole organization just based on everyone's opinion, but valuable insights that come in and the data that comes in from items such as surveys and whatnot, that plays a huge part, right? And can play a huge part in the overall building of the trust, again, building of the culture of the organization. And now you've empowered your frontline workers when they feel like they had an opportunity to have a say so, or even just being able to improve the communications of it, right? Because sometimes we may get the data, we may say the data, the final decision and recommendations of that data, it may take 12, 36 months before we actually see it come to life. And so, but the communications during that time period, can we communicate to our staff and our departments that, okay, we're working on getting here? And so again, that goes back to your communication strategies and your communication plans, and why it's important for HR to be a part in those conversations. Because if somebody's expecting a raise, you know, raises are coming. Well, it does take some time. How are the raises being calculated? Or we want to, we completed a pay equity analysis and we want to try to make things right. Okay, we've identified this, but then how long does it take, to actually implement it? And so just bringing your team along with you for, while you're going through these processes, you're building the trust. And so now 3 years later, if nothing happens and you're still in the same place, it's going to be a breakdown, right? However, 3 years later, because now you've actively identified, the plan, the strategies are being worked out, you're actively, finding solutions to be able to provide. And now 3 years later, you should be able to have some results. And for the people who have stayed during that time period and then to see how those, results come to pass, it's more rewarding than they can probably ever put to words. And I've been a part of that type of organization, going through the Great Recession, having a leader who said, hang in here with us, we are, and my background coming from a financial, institution, where they were being shut down. In Georgia, we're based in Georgia. Georgia was the number one state with the most failed banks during the Great Recession. And so to be a part of the conversation, having a leader who communicated our goals, who ended, told us, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. We all took the active steps, right? And then, come 2013, we started making money again. And we were like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is amazing. And then, and that gave me the opportunity then to be able to pursue, and advance my career, and was fully supported. That's a great time when you have organizations, Chick-fil-A, and I would have to put a plug in. Chick-fil-A, for instance, I was talking to an owner operator at one of the Chick-fil-A's, and he said he knows the lifespan of his employee is going to be between 3 and 5 years. And he really does not, because it's your high school students, right? They come in high school, they're young, they're frontline workers, they're working. He said it's their goal to develop great citizens, to be able to develop competent workers in the workforce. And so if they never stay with Chick-fil-A, that's okay with them, because they want them to go out and win, and become great. And so we have organizations that can support that, have those type of conversations. It's just a beautiful, it's a beautiful thing when you can see the lifespan of it play out.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds from what you're saying, it's just there's a connection. We need the communication strategy, of course, but we also need the actions to back it up, right? Because I think that's where some of that distrust comes from, right? When, like you said, if 3 years later you're saying the same things and absolutely nothing has changed, then you're going to be talking to a whole new batch of employees because very few will stick around for that. And that's just going to, you know, um, hurt the trust that you're trying to build. And so I think as HR leaders, there's a huge opportunity to be able to be that advocate for your people, to maybe take the effort to really get that information from your managers, from even your frontline employees, and then bring that to senior leadership and help them to understand the impact, and really help them know what is working and what isn't, and be able to advocate when we need to communicate transparency and when we need, to see the needle move and to actually see application. So I think that's hugely, impactful. And it sounds easy. It's easier said than done. We recognize this, but just recognizing, I think, the power that HR leaders, have to be that advocate for their people is huge, when it comes to saying we want to transform our organizational culture. There's so much power with everybody who's on this call listening, to be able to do that in their organizations. And I think that's what is really exciting when I think about it. And we've had a few questions. I think you've answered some of them too, just about what are things that organizations can do. And I think you've mentioned a little bit. So I'd love, as we're wrapping up on time, to ask, so if some of these activities are being done, how do you measure the impact of it? Are there different ways that we can better measure? I think you've mentioned some of those things, but I'd love to kind of go maybe a little bit deeper. And how do you measure the impact of the trust building initiatives, that some of our organizations might be doing, or some of these ideas and suggestions that you've mentioned today, as they put those into place? How can they see that that's making a difference?
Yeah, when we look at surveys, for instance, right? We're going to have day one survey and then now follow-up surveys. Those can be as frequent as, monthly, right? If we want to really be involved in moving the needle, we're going to track it through surveys. And I know every single time a survey goes out, if you want certain results, and this survey is going out and, by day X, then you're really going to make sure things are in place to be able to move the needle, actively measuring. You look at engagement, right? How engaged are our employees? Are people starting to show up to maybe some non-required events? And you look at, turnout, in those capacities. Are they, online? Are they now putting their camera on online? The constant feedback, ongoing feedback. And today we have technology that we don't have to have such long gaps, to take advantage of these opportunities to, have more frequent feedback, the dialogue within conversations. If your, organization does have an app, for instance, that you have, communications that you're tracking, you start looking at utilization. Oh, we haven't heard from this, particular employee ever in the platform. And so now something's buzzing, something's stirring up that's causing the engagement to increase. Um, and so, again, there's different, applications that you can use to physically measure. You can look at your survey measurements, you look at your performance metrics, right? Everyone has some type of level that they have to be accountable for. We have actually worked with organizations, though, that has had no formal performance, management tracking in place. And so that's a good opportunity because there are organizations that do not formally track the performance of their people. And so once you do start implementing some of those, again, we're thinking about our change management, right? We want to make sure we communicate it appropriately. We want to make sure, no one's feeling threatened, you know, um, about the change that's coming. But there are different metrics that we can, just measure and see how are our efforts now translating out throughout the organization in our numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I am not a data person. I am a communications person, but there's so much data that we can get in today's organizations. And I think sometimes the challenge is, are we tracking the right things? And, I know for me, I have my KPIs that I know I need, but there's so much that you can go deeper. And I think before we usually had to rely on our data analysts and kind of tap on those folks in our teams, which is great. We love them, we need them. But now with technology and with AI specifically, and we talk about AI, everywhere. So it's like, is it really as valuable as it claims? But in this case, I really think it is because it can really help us go deeper to finding those things where before maybe we had to really track it manually. Taking up a lot of time, a lot of effort, and again, a ton of human error, right? Especially if I was in charge of that level of data. But being able to really utilize AI to find those nuances and to go in and say what is really working and not just take that top level number that might make it appear that everything's great, but then when you go deeper, that's where you're seeing, okay, well, it's great overall, which is exciting, we should celebrate that, but maybe in this department or in this demographic or in this age group we
Mm-hmm.
could we could do better. And how do we do better? So I think when it comes to technology, especially for if anyone's a non-numbers person like me, there's a lot of benefits that we can utilize for that and for moving the needle and seeing how effective our efforts are.
Exactly, exactly. And leveraging technology that can, Culturefy, for instance, has the function through AI to come up with recommendations based on that data, based on your industry, based on, the information that is fed within the platform. Now, you have actual recommendations on what you can do for your team and your organization listed out in tasks, right? To literally move the needle forward. Because, yeah, a lot of organizations typically have gotten the data, and then now we may have recommendations, from humans, right? Sometimes humans help give, well, you should do this, you should do this. One, AI is just going to, enhance those recommendations even more because it's pulling from so many different resources versus just the one human and their experiences based on their work path. But now it's the how do we really implement change in our organization with these recommendations and what we should do. But when we start really helping individuals with how, and from an HR perspective, it's our goal to constantly be able to help leaders with, like, how are you about to finish, how are you about to improve your um your department and whatnot. Well, we're here to support you with tools to be able to now empower you, to be able to act on those recommendations, to move the needle forward.
Yeah, and I think that ties in a little bit to the last question I'll pull in from our Q&A is on that line of thinking, but really saying, how can you keep, if you work in a large organization with a ton of different leaders, how can you really help keep them accountable for upholding the company's mission, vision, and values? I mean, that's a big question. And I think some of what you're saying, Amanda, is that there are tools created and data that, as HR leaders can empower us and equip us to go to leaders in the right way with the data to back our recommendations, as one way of maybe helping. But I mean, obviously, that is a tricky situation, especially in big organizations. Do you have any suggestions or advice for somebody navigating that situation?
Well, I think accountability comes back to ownership. When we look, you are really only accountable for yourself. And so, what are you going to take ownership, as an individual? And it's a lot easier to take ownership when you trust, the reasoning behind it. Some people may just lack, in certain areas that we do have to acknowledge that. But when you have an amazing culture and you have a culture of trust, right? You have a culture of performance, you then start, you build that culture of accountability. And so when the ways you build the culture of accountability are you rewarding and recognizing, for instance, the work that is being done? Some people don't take accountability because they feel their work will never be rewarded and recognized. And so again, now it's like we have data. What are we doing with the data? How do we want to hold our people accountable? Again, they kind of have to take that ownership themselves. So the way they take the ownership is, are they feeling heard? Are they truly feeling a part of this organization? The only way you'll ever know is if, how they really feel is if you get to know them. In relationships, you have to get to know the individual that you're in a relationship with. And so whether you're the relationship with your manager, your relationship with HR rep, your, relationship with your colleagues, the only way, is relational. And when we start looking at relationships, people naturally will take more accountability for themselves because they don't want to hurt, the individual. They don't want to hurt the organization. But then at the same time, they're not getting hurt by the organization. They are being rewarded again and recognized. They have had the opportunity to go through learning and development. They feel their voices are being heard. And so that all builds community. And so the biggest thing that, we can leave people with is like, let's look at our overall culture, right? And then how can our different roles, not only just HR, but how can our different roles play a part in improving the overall culture? And then not being afraid to speak up. Some of the hard part is that some people feel like they can't speak up. And so the year 2024, I would just want to encourage everyone, when you know you're doing the right thing, you're here to perform, feel free to speak up, because certain people, they don't know what they don't know. And I've had that opportunity, in my, with previous employers, that having, going to them with conversations and with, ideas, can we try this? And just, blown by the, reception of those ideas. And so I think sometimes we naturally can put, our own, perceptions on how things will be perceived, from leadership. But leadership is actually, because they're still wanting that bottom line, to be increased for everyone. And so I'm not being afraid to have difficult conversations as well.
Yeah, yeah. And trusting that human element, right? That there is that care, and you're wanting to build a culture of care, and trust, then showing up in the small ways, and then that becomes your culture, right? Over time. I think that's really powerful. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. We're coming to the end of our time and we've covered a ton. I'm sure there's more. Thank you everyone who's been engaging in our chat and in our Q&A. And we talked a lot about challenges and opportunities to improve talent loyalty by building trust with HR. It can sound easy, but we know it's not. And at Culturefy, we offer a lot of solutions to help organizations to leverage AI to help address some of these issues and to help you move the needle in your organization in ways to build work-life cultures that authentically embody your organization's brand's mission, vision, and values, and cultivate trust with your people. So if you're looking for help or you want to learn more, we'd love to connect with you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out at info@culturefy.com or check out our website, culturefy.com. And of course, we would love to connect with you. And of course, a huge thank you, Amanda, for being here today. I love this conversation. It's conversations like this that I think really go a long way in helping to build that culture of trust that you're talking about. And so I think it's really beneficial for everyone. And so thank you for everyone who tuned in, for joining our What's Trending in HR Roundtable discussion. We hope that it sparked ideas and some conversations with your teams. Coming up, we do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. on Thursdays. So next Thursday, February 8th, we'll be looking at the link between well-being and engagement. What does that look like? What are organizations getting wrong? And what is today's candidate really looking for when it comes to well-being initiatives in organizations? So be sure to tune in and join that conversation. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you again for being here, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kristen.